The United States of America is currently considered to be one of the strongest countries in the world. It was not involved in either of the World Wars I and II, but when it got involved, it was decisive and changed the course of both wars. Most importantly, the United States emerged victorious at the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and that fact placed it in the number of the single and unquestioned world superpower. However, the strength of America cannot be assessed only in military or economic parameters. The American way of life has permeated the rest of the world through its culture, values, political concepts, and technological impacts. The largest empires in the world history, like Rome or Britain, could not acquire the same degree of the cultural spread and power all over the world the United States has nowadays. To realize how this great country was formed, we have to go back approximately 250 years to the very roots of American history. The 15th century marked the age of exploration in Europe as the great powers were in search of new lands, routes, and resources. The initial years of overseas expansion were under the control of Spain and Portugal, but Britain was caught up quickly. When the wars against Spain were ended in 1603 with the election of King James I on the throne, Britain shifted attention to foreign territories. On the other side of the Atlantic, an enormous and unfamiliar continent became the source of the British ambition. The Jamestown settlement became the first permanent English settlement in North America in 1607. The early colony life was a hard life that was characterized by illness, hunger, and insecurity. But as time passed, Jamestown managed to survive and started increasing. Other colonies were added to the Atlantic coast, and Europeans started referring to the continent as the New World. To several, this New World was the promise of hope. The poor, the landless, the religious minorities, the adventurers, and even the criminals were crossing the ocean in pursuit of new lives. Gradually, these colonies grew into 13 colonies in New England to Georgia. The colonies grew at a fast rate compared to the never-ending wars in Europe. They constructed trade networks, trade towns, and farms. As time went by, the colonists had their own governance structures and became accustomed to running their own business. Initially, the colonies in Britain had a stable relationship. The colonies provided raw materials and wealth, and Britain provided protection. This balance would, however, soon collapse. The 7 Years' War was a wide global war fought by Britain and France between 1756 and 1763. Britain was the winner as it won vast lands in North America, but success came at a great price. Britain was in debt to an immense extent due to the war. The British government also introduced a number of taxes on its colonies in America in a bid to amend their financial situation. This was not tolerated by the colonists. They are paying taxes in the British Parliament without representation. The protests prevailed across the colonies on the slogan, "No taxation without representation." The situation continued to deteriorate when in 1767, the Townshend Acts were introduced that imposing new taxes on the common goods like glass, paper, and tea. The breaking point came in 1773. The British had to deliver tea to Boston Harbor, and as a sign of defiance, colonists had to climb the vessels and dump hundreds of chests of tea into the sea. This was known as the Boston Tea Party, and it was a dramatic turning point. The British government reacted by increasing control over the colonies through brutal actions. The colonies retaliated by making war preparations. Armed conflict erupted in 1775. In order to command the colonial army, the Continental Congress appointed George Washington as commander of the Continental Army. The American army was ill-trained, ill-equipped, and inexperienced. It was almost impossible to confront the most potent empire in the world. However, the desire of freedom was strong in the colonists. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was proclaimed. This bold document declared that the 13 colonies were now free and independent states, no longer under British rule. It was a message of defiance to Britain and a declaration of purpose to the entire world. The war that followed was long and uncertain. The British achieved early victories, including the capture of New York. At several points, the Continental Army stood on the brink of collapse. Yet Washington refused to surrender. In the winter of 1776, he carried out a daring surprise attack by crossing the icy Delaware River on Christmas night and striking British forces at Trenton. The unexpected victory restored morale and proved that the British Army was not invincible. As the conflict continued, the struggle in America became part of a larger global rivalry. France, Britain's long-standing enemy, saw a chance to weaken its rival. In 1778, France officially entered the war on the American side. Soon after, Spain and the Netherlands also joined against Britain. French naval power, military support, weapons and financial aid transformed the balance of the war and brought the Americans closer to victory. The last and ultimate episode in the war happened in 1781 at Yorktown. British General Lord Cornwallis had his troops stationed in the Virginia coast awaiting sea reinforcements. In its place, French warships had obstructed the fleet of Britain, and the armies of Americans and French had blocked Cornwallis on land. The British general surrendered with almost 7,000 men, who were trapped and outnumbered. This defeat practically eliminated the hopes of Britain to win the war. The Treaty of Paris was signed 2 years later on September 3, 1783. Britain officially accepted the sovereignty of the United States of America. The final British soldiers would later leave New York in that same year, and in a ritual procession, George Washington was walking into the city as a winning commander of a new nation. The after effects of the American War of Independence had far-reaching effects to outside America. France became heavily indebted, soon plunged into abject economic crisis. This failure was instrumental in the French Revolution that occurred in 1789. The weakened Spain slowly lost grip on large parts of its empire in Latin America. The American Revolution had brought about a wave of world revolution. To the United States, independence was only the start. During the next several decades, the country grew westwards across the continent by exploration, settlement, and warfare. The politics, identity, and slavery eventually turned into internal divisions, which culminated into the Civil War between 1861 and 1865, which would later become the battle that would determine the future of the nation. The United States passed through the Civil War and experienced a time of booming growth. It had its industries grow, east-west railroads linked, and millions of immigrants had come to seek their opportunity. By the early 20th century, the former colony America was already turning into an emerging world power. The United States kept on steadily rising through 2 world wars, economic distress, ideological and technological development. Gradually, it grew to be the world's superpower as we know it, and all the way up to the very heights of global leadership. The United States story is one of revolution, struggle, ambition, and change. A chronicle that has changed not only a country, but America has changed the world history itself.